Welcome to LifeShine. My name is John Whitt, and I'm your host. At LifeShine, we promote reckless generosity. We encourage our guests to shine their light brighter so that they can share their good works and glorify our Father in heaven. Today, our guest is author, speaker, executive coach, and business coach, owner and founder of Growth Source Coaching, Steve Smith. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Steve, start us off. Growth Source Coaching, how'd that get started? Where'd that come from, and what's it mean?
Well, the name is kind of interesting. It's a great example of what happens when you're really working hard to come up with a very unique name for your business and you don't actually say it out loud. So it's a little bit of a tongue twister, but it basically means where's the source of growth for people I work with? And it's always the individual, the client. Mm-hmm. That's where the growth comes from. I'm just the catalyst that helps bring that out and helps them really make what they will of it so they can be their best performer in the job that they have. I started it back in 2008. I actually got out of a 30-year career in consumer products, and this was the most serendipitous moment I've ever lived for because I didn't realize this is what I was meant to do. I was just looking for something that would take a lot of travel out of my life, keep me local. I was introduced to coaching, and the more I looked into it and the more I talked to people about it, the more I realized this was a perfect match for what I do well.
Yeah. So we talked about executive coaching and business coaching. Just share a little bit about the difference there. I know you do both.
Yes, and they both have a lot of common methodologies associated with helping people become the best that they can be. But from a business coaching standpoint, it's really more of a standpoint of learning how to manage an operation very smoothly, very efficiently, so you can derive the maximum amount of profit for your effort as possible. And then it gets into marketing, because without marketing, most businesses are going to come to an end.
They don't go anywhere. Yeah.
Right. When I flip over into executive coaching, that's really more about how to lead organizations, how to define where you're taking people and then be able to get the people to follow you. So it's, building relationships and communication and things that are going to allow you to be able to do what the organization requires through a whole group of people, not just you.
So we're going to talk about generosity in just a minute. I want to ask a couple other questions before then. So what are the most common issues, challenges that you're solving or helping to solve for your clients on the business side and the executive side?
And this is actually very common for both sides.
Okay.
But at some point, whether it's people that have moved from a startup or an entrepreneurial phase into more of an established organization, or maybe somebody that owns a company and has been around for 20 or 30 years, at some point, everybody goes through this situation where they lose clarity. They have forgotten what their role is and what they're there to do. They may have had their hands in all kinds of different things along the way, and they just haven't figured out, okay, today, what's the best use of my time and focus? And so without that clarity, they end up getting in everybody else's way. They don't realize it. They think they're doing what's right for the company.
They think they're helping.
They think they're helping, but they're really not. And until you get them to back off and say, what am I really going to do that's going to help this company and let everybody else do what they do best? That's the clarity part. The other piece is that inner confidence that says, gee, I just got promoted to VP of this or that, or I'm now the CFO of an organization. Do I actually feel internally like I'm worthy of that? That I have the skills, the ability, the mental acuity to operate in that realm? Or am I still thinking like I was when I started as an accountant 6 or 7 years ago? So the confidence, the inner confidence to really live your role and the clarity to know what to do and what not to do is probably 80% of what I work with.
Yeah, it sounds like you're overcoming a little bit of imposter syndrome.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've had people actually tell me that they've been feeling this way for a long time and they just don't know how to get past it and be able to show up and live what they're truly good at doing.
Right. So let's move into that generosity space. When I say generosity, my objective here obviously is to make people be more generous. I think the world needs more generosity.
Yes.
How does that fit into your business and into you individually?
Well, a big part of my whole philosophy with working with whether it's clients or helping colleagues or even people in my social circles is figure out what it is that's going to help them advance and give them what they need. and don't expect anything in return. Don't assume that they're going to write you a check for it. Just give it to them because you know I can do that. I can afford to give away the things that I know how to do, the experience, the insights I've gained over my 40 plus years in business. Just give it to them. Let them run with it. And if you do that enough, it's this law of reciprocity.
Oh, right.
People will they'll stay up at night thinking about how they can pay you back because you've showered them with things that have literally, in some cases, changed the course of their direction, and you didn't ask anything in return.
And when you share, I think there's a couple things here. Number one, there's no way you can share 40 years of information, knowledge, and skill at any one particular point in time. You're getting a little
And
little
when I
piece.
try to do that, you can immediately
you're
see
just
in their
going to
faces.
overwhelm them, right? You're just going to kill them. But
Right.
here's a really cool thing, and there's no charge and there's no expectation to do anything, and it could be life changing. And when you see that happen, how do you feel?
Well, as I've told many other people, the reason that, look, I had a great career. I worked for 4 really, really well-established companies that actually gave me the tools that allow me to do what I do today. But I've never had an assignment, if you will, an occupation that I think was as close a fit for how I think and what I want to do. It makes all the best use of the talents that I have. And so every morning, I could be staring at a week of Monday mornings, and it wouldn't matter. Because after that first call with that first client that you can hear it in their voice, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. That's all it takes. I got enough energy for the rest of the day.
And the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And on you go.
It keeps going.
I know for me, I when I deliver those things, especially when I'm spot on, the exact right answer, right solution, because that's what I want to get them. And I watch that light bulb go off, right? That's what you're sharing.
Right.
And I'll get goosebumps because it's like, wow, I hit that target. I hit that right. That was a bullseye.
And the bonus of that is once you do this a lot of times, and in the 14 years I've had this business, I've worked with just shy of about 600 companies. So after a while, you start to see patterns in the path that people walk. And sometimes very early on, when that light bulb moment goes off and they really put their arms around it and take ownership for doing something with it, and it propels them towards the goal that they want, I already know where this thing's going to play out. You can see it. They don't see it.
They don't know because they haven't done it yet, but you've seen it several times.
Yeah, and just some positive words to people like, you've already accomplished the really hard part of this. The rest of it is just planning and execution and being consistent with your application. And once they actually get it in their heads and they believe that, they're running by themselves. I'm just working with them to keep them in the guardrails because so they don't go off in the weeds.
Yeah, they don't go off over here somewhere. It's possible because we all can do that. So generosity certainly fits in your business.
It's an integral, part of the recipe.
We talk about generosity. We think about. I think a lot of people think about money and can I donate or share money, but not everybody has a lot of money. Mm-hmm. For those that do, there's some great tax advantages. There's really some good reasons to be generous.
Yes.
But if you don't have a lot of money, some people don't understand how to be generous.
Right.
So what are some things that you might recommend?
To me, when you boil down everything that people have to work with, there's only 2 primary resources out there. There's money and there's time. And if you don't have the money, and this is very apropos for startups, people that are entrepreneurial and they want to start something and bootstrap it from the ground up. 9 times out of 10, they don't have the money.
They don't.
But they have plenty of time. And so it might be a lot of, time, investment, sweat equity to get it to a point where you're generating the money that you can now pay other people to do things on your behalf. Mm-hmm. From a generosity standpoint, if you don't have a lot of money to give people, which, helps people a lot because money's, our universal currency, right?
Yeah, right.
But if you don't have that, the next best thing you can do is share with people what you've learned over long periods of time. You've kind of synthesized it down and taken all the bumps and the mistakes out of it, and you can give people, formulas for doing things. Obviously, they have to take it and do something with it to make it work for them. But a lot of times, if you just share things with people that work, they're just best practices in any field, there's no amount of money I can think of that can offset that, because once they internalize it and they own it and they've gotten success with it themselves, it's theirs.
Yeah, yeah. I'm doing a little work with the Portland Rescue Mission, and I'm helping folks that are, homeless or struggling to re-enter society. And so I teach a lot of, how do I go interview, how do I talk, how do I communicate, how do I do that kind of thing, and it warms my heart because they are so appreciative.
Yes.
They're coming from a hard spot. They've probably spent a lot of time in this program, and now there's a little light out there, right? And they're looking for that light, and they're moving to that light, and they're getting some wisdom, and they're really appreciative. And I look at it and say, this just takes me 3 hours a week, and I'm like, wow, that makes me feel so good. There's a joy that shows up in here that makes a big difference to me.
Well, in the last 2 years, we've all been dealing with various phases of isolation and remote work.
Crazy.
And things like that. And I think today, most people that aren't well settled with real solid support groups around them, whether it be family or social circles or things like that, I think people at some point every day sit back and think, does anybody really care? If I were just to leave the planet tomorrow, would anybody notice? Because not enough people do things organically in a generous manner to signal to somebody else, I know you need help, and I'm not going to wait for you to ask. I'm just going to offer this up. What that tells the other person is somebody cares about me. And I don't think there's a greater gift you can give people than that sense that I'm not the only one.
Yeah, and they're worthy,
my life
and
means
people
something.
care.
Right.
And so I think, even with time, things like kindness and patience and gentleness, just how do you react to the events of the world? Because it's been a couple tough years.
Oh, yeah.
And learning to react and respond to your fellow man and adversity in a generous manner, as opposed to an angry or an attacking manner. I mean, it makes all the difference in the world for us getting along with each other and moving forward.
Yeah, and that's another area that, especially when I'm working with people in operational management levels, where they're interacting with people on a regular basis. And frequently what I find is that what people need to learn how to do is to act, to respond, not to react. Because when you're in a reaction mode, it's all emotion. It's all animal instinct. So if somebody, pushes a button or pulls a trigger on you and you just explode on them, it's going to settle. The heat's going to go down in the room at some point. But now you're left with having to figure out how to repair what you just damaged. And so getting people that are prone to doing that kind of thing, and there's a lot of them out there.
It's out there.
It can be a difficult process, but once people realize the benefits of just taking a breather, counting to 3, and then responding to what the situation calls for, as opposed to immediately reacting, that can change everything in terms of not only helping people over difficult situations or helping them kind of come back from a major mistake they made, but preserving the relationship that you may have spent years cultivating up to that point.
It's so hard to recover. Yeah. So I think communicating with kindness, communicating effectively. You don't have to agree. You don't have to be a doormat, but you need to know,
Right.
What's the process here, so that you're not creating more damage.
Right.
Because you can.
Oh, yeah.
And hey, I'll raise my hand and say I have. Those are things I've learned. And then being able to share people a process, and it's actually a fairly simple process, but they don't know it. They haven't seen it. They haven't processed it. So how can they get into that, and how can they practice and get better at it?
Right.
Because communication is, it's so much of every part of our day.
Well, I've worked with some, fairly high up individuals over the years that have trained themselves not to engage in certain critical situations, because they've learned from history that when they get involved, it's like setting a match to a bigger pile of leaves. And so
Gasoline.
To keep that from happening, they sit back, and sometimes to their own detriment. And it's all because they haven't really sat down and figured out, is there a better way to show up? Sometimes you have to put your own ego in your back pocket and show up in a different style that helps the situation, not just add more more heat to the
where you're contributing, right? As something besides gasoline on the fire.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I want you to do a favor here. I'd like you to share with us, a big success story that you've got where you've been working with either an executive or a business owner. And then I want you to be generous and share some things that, if you were a small business owner or an executive, you should avoid.
Okay.
Or things that you should do, right? And maybe other places where they can gain wisdom, obviously from you, but there's lots of places you've learned from everywhere. So have I.
Yes. All right. So one of the things that has happened more than just occasionally, it happens frequently, and it's never part of my initial engagement with a client. When people come to me, they're looking to improve what they're already doing, maybe get rid of some things that have caused them problems, but they just want to feel like they're at a peak level of performance in the role that they have. Okay. But frequently over the years, what has happened is for people that are maybe not the owners of the companies, but they're more at executive levels within larger companies.
Okay.
Usually within about 6 months after I get done working with them, they end up getting promoted. Mm-hmm. And they don't come to me up front and say, gee, I need to get promoted, help me position myself for that. It's usually something more immediate, and that just ends up being the byproduct of them now showing up and operating in more of a clear, confident manner. And then people around them looking at that and say, okay, well, that guy's really changed. He's doing well. We should have him up here doing the same thing. So that's a byproduct that is always kind of nice to hear. And I'm working with a fairly large company in the shipping arena now. And one of the people that they assigned me to help was a person that's in a very remote location, very important market, but it's probably the farthest away from the headquarters.
Okay.
And as a result, this person kind of felt like they'd been neglected. They weren't really being listened to. They knew the market very well, but nobody was
they're away.
acknowledging
They're
that.
far away.
Right. And so as a result, they had developed a very caustic kind of, not really arrogant, but more of kind of a mean-spirited delivery. And as a result, they were pushing people away. People were less interested in communicating with them because of just how they delivered. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with this individual for a little over a year and got them to go from being aggressive to assertive.
It's a massive change, but it's not that massive. I mean, it's not like...
No, it's not like massive degrees, but for somebody that has developed a penchant for having a very aggressive communication style, to get them to go to an assertive communication style, which has humongous benefits in terms of relationship building and influence and things like that. But in that person's head, it's like, I'm giving ground. I have to soften up.
Yeah, I'm not being me.
Right, I'm not being me. And I said, look, what you don't realize is the style that you've developed now is actually working against you.
It's hindering you. Yeah.
Let's preserve what really works for you, but let's change the delivery so you're inviting people in as opposed to pushing them away. And so when that individual started doing that, all of a sudden things started to change. And some things in the marketplace happened last year, which really gave that particular location a big boost. But now I think they're being positioned for a higher role. And it was never part of the plan up front. Never part of the plan.
It was just, you had a problem, an issue that had to be solved.
Right.
But it's that communication component is so dramatic.
Yes.
That once somebody has it, they can take on new levels. They can move up. And often it happens a heck of a lot faster than anybody ever thought.
Right.
Right? Just, if you could just make that change,
yes.
You could, the sky just starts to open up and the opportunity starts to grow.
Right. So you're talking about what would I share with, business owner, any kind of a business professional that would make them better. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of really easy ones. And believe me, I didn't invent any of this stuff.
Yeah, I understand. I say the same thing. I didn't invent it. It's on the internet. Right. You can find it.
Right. So the first thing I tell people is become very aware. This falls under the emotional intelligence category. Uh-huh. Okay. Become very aware of how you influence other people's reactions, their emotional span. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because without knowing it, you can send people into a tailspin and not even be aware that it's coming from you, okay? And so for people that are in positions of authority and influence over teams or departments or entire companies, get in the habit of just asking more questions and listening. Spend 20% of your communication style asking good open-ended questions that invite people to tell you things that they already know. Spend the other 80% of the time listening.
So Stephen Covey, right? He wrote 7 Habits, and one of those is seek first to understand. That's the message here.
And the beautiful thing about this is it has massive implications on the kind of relationship you have with people and how they see you as the leader, and it costs nothing other than just the mental acuity to do it, to be in that moment and restrain from just talking your way into a problem or talking everybody else into a coma. And that happens quite a bit with leaders that are very aggressive, very driven. You know, they might have been the starters of the business that they now own that's morphed into hundreds of people. And they have this desire to be schooling everybody every minute of the day. And it's like, no, don't do that anymore. Sit back and invite people to tell you what they're seeing at levels that you don't operate at anymore. Because that's the information that's going to help you make better decisions at the top.
I think active listening, which is what you're discussing about, is an act of generosity.
Oh, it is.
You're actually giving them the gift of listening and paying attention and processing.
Yes.
And so it's just another little tiny way that you can employ generosity for big results.
Right. The other thing I think is a major shift for a lot of people that find themselves chronically in a state of overwhelm, massive amounts of busyness, being pulled in different directions. And I take this from the real estate industry, okay? So if you ever talk to a real estate developer, somebody that's buying huge chunks of land, there's this thing called highest and best use, okay? What's the best value for that land that you're going to develop into something? Look at your calendar every day and treat it like real estate. What is the highest and best use of your time?
For that hour, those hours, whatever.
Right. For that hour. And as things come to you, you should ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, who else can I get to do this? And number 2, if there's nobody around, who can I train to do this? But make sure you give the appropriate amount of responsibility and authority to people you've hired and let them do that on your behalf. So the time you have left is spent on things that are truly of benefit for you to do.
I agree. And I think the one of the places where I've seen people get hung up is they don't think somebody else can do it as well as them.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and maybe nobody can do it as good as you, right? The question is, can they do it good enough to allow you to focus on your highest and best use? Okay,
so here's something that I frequently get playback on when I take somebody through that whole thing about learning how to delegate, because delegation, if done right, can be an incredible training tool as well, okay? What I frequently hear is not only did the other person learn how to do it, but over a fairly short period of time, they're doing it better.
Yeah, right.
Because they have the time to focus on it. And if it's something that taps into a core specialty or a skill that they've always been walking around with, now they feel really good that their skills are being put towards something that's important, not just daily routine stuff that, that 8 hours can encompass. And so, there's a lot of people walking around thinking that what I do, nobody else can do. You know what? There's a lot of people that can do that.
There's a lot of people. Yeah.
Right. And the minute you figure that out and surrender over a lot of low-level, important, but tasks that shouldn't be on your plate,
right? Not your
the happier the rest of your organization ends up being.
Yeah. So that's a couple things of things that people should do. What are some things they should avoid?
Well, that's a long list, and
start with the top 2.
One of the things that I find frequently, and it falls under the level of decision making. In fact, this is one thing that I wrote in one of my first books that I called Leadership Axioms. And it was 14 principles that I had learned along a long path that have stuck with me, that have served me well ever since. And the first one is, when it comes to decision making, don't choose the easy wrong over the difficult right. And many times people will try to take shortcuts with decisions because it's easier, it's more immediate, it might be less costly, when the real right decision was a lot more complicated and probably a lot more difficult to get through.
More energy, maybe a little bit more money, maybe a little more time.
Right. And the reason I tell people in leadership roles to really consider that is because what most people don't stop and think about is every time I make a decision, the people that are involved or the people that are in the periphery kind of standing back watching this play out, they develop an impression of who you are based on whether you're willing to call the shot correctly or not. And that has massive ripple effects. And many times the leader in the center, they don't see that. One day they wake up and they've got a reputation that has some unattractive qualities to it.
Oops.
And it's
From a
because
decision-making standpoint, yeah.
And everybody around them has put 2 and 2 together and come up with 5, but it doesn't matter because perception always leads reality. And so every time you step up and have to make a difficult decision about what your company's going to invest in, who you're going to fire, who you're going to let go, where you're going to take the organization, people are measuring your fortitude and your integrity based on what you say you're going to do. And a lot of times people don't think about that. And one day they wake up and they realize they've taken all these shortcuts and they've done all this really kind of cool stuff that other people look at as, well, I don't know that I want to be associated with companies that run like that.
So avoid the easy wrong. And that wrong then can build into another one. It can build pretty soon. All of a sudden you're no longer on the right, you're on the wrong. Any number of things can happen there. What else? Is there anything else?
Here's the other one, and this goes to the heart of any really, really solid leader that has people that genuinely respect them through thick and thin, okay? It goes like this. Admonish privately, acknowledge publicly.
Yeah.
So if you have to talk to somebody about something they've either made a mistake on or a perpetual problem that they're dealing with, the worst time you can do it is in front of their peers. It gets done quite a bit because it's like they're trying to send a message so everybody else gets the message. It doesn't do that. What they don't realize is that the person that they're aiming at with their admonishments has completely checked out and has probably along the way decided they're not loyal anymore. They're going to show up and do their work. They're going to lay below the radar, but that's the extent of it. The loyalty's gone. All right. On the flip side, when you want to give somebody acknowledgement of something they've really done well, and you bring them in the office and close the door and just say, hey, I just want you to know you really did well with that. Sure, it's going to have short-term impact, but what really, really affects the organization is when you do it in front of their peers. When you let everybody know that they rose to the challenge, they hit it out of the park, and we would love to have everybody else do the same thing. So admonish privately, acknowledge publicly.
Yeah, it's an old story in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you just learned that yesterday. You've known that for years. Right. I have too, and yet, we still see that situation.
Yes.
So great. Two things to avoid. Thank you so much for that. What about, so the last thing is, and again, thank you for your generosity here because you're sharing some really valuable information for our viewers. Wisdom. Right? We all need wisdom, right? So we can all use more wisdom and understanding, right? So what would you recommend for other people as they're learning and they're growing, and certainly they can engage with a coach and they can certainly reach out to you, but what have you read, seen, heard? Who do you really enjoy? What's really working for you?
You mean in terms of people that I derive wisdom from?
Yeah, that's a better way to ask the question.
Okay, so a lot of times the things that end up being wise observations or advice or things like that, for me, come through insights. And insights are simply people's experiences that they're able to bring up in an appropriate situation that somebody else can say, yeah, I've been there before, I've made that same mistake, and now I know how to not make it anymore. So they've derived insight from somebody else's wisdom, okay? So there's a number of people that I like to follow and watch their videos, read their articles. Seth Godin is a great one from a marketing standpoint. Simon Sinek from a leadership standpoint is a fabulous guy to listen to. One of the books that I read early on when I started this, which was an absolute watershed moment for me, was written by one of the most premier executive coaches in the U.S. today, and his name is Marshall Goldsmith. And one of the books, he's written 10 or 11 books now, but I think the first book he wrote, I think it was the first one, it's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it was fascinating because he had done this study on the thousands of people that he had worked with, and he had come up with like 23 or 24 personal behaviors that executives do many times without realizing it that cause everybody around them to kind of distance themselves from the individual. And he said the problem is that many people rise to certain levels of importance and responsibility based on what they've done, not realizing that the territory they're walking into requires a whole different skill set. And he said, these are the things that I've chronicled along the way that cause many executives to reach their Peter principle early in life. And so I read that book and I thought, oh my God, I'm guilty of 6 of them. And I've only been
just
halfway
like
through the book. Yeah. So it really, that was insightful, and I drew from his wisdom, the years he's done this and the people he's talked to. And so, to me, you don't have to go to an old sage, so to speak. Many times you can gain wisdom-like insight just from observing and talking to people, sometimes only a couple of years in their career. Why? Because they haven't been molded into the things that everybody just assumes is the way things should happen. They're brand new. They show up, they call it like it is. Sometimes that's hugely valuable.
New and fresh perspectives.
New and fresh perspective can be all the wisdom you need in any given moment to figure out where to go next.
I see that today in the technology space. I mean, the students coming out of college today, that they're so technically astute.
Yes.
Compared to me, or compared to most.
Compared to a lot of us.
Yeah, and it's just, we have to learn how do we get in there, right? And in some ways they might know that they're technically more astute than us, and we have to figure out how do we work with them, but they've got so much insight, so much perspective. So, it's just another place where we learn to be a little bit better. So.
Yeah.
Steve, thank you so much for being generous with your time.
Hey, thank you for having me. This
sharing.
has been wonderful. I'm very happy to be able to be on here and have these conversations with you.
Again, just very, very generous. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Wherever you are today, thanks for joining us. Please be generous, scroll down, leave us a comment, click that subscribe button. And if you'd like to engage with other folks that are like-minded from a generosity concept, you can join us at our free community. That's at lifeshine.live. That's lifeshine.live. Thanks again for joining us, and may your light shine brighter today on your good days.